Edvard Munch said that the playwright Henrik Ibsen, who was older than him, had thrown a log into the anthill. Ibsen's log disrupted the perceptions of contemporary society. He opened the way for Munch. And Munch took on Ibsen's characters as alter egos. He painted himself as Peer Gynt and as Oswald from Ghosts. And the influence was mutual. When Ibsen saw Munch's picture, Woman in Three Stages, we can see it in the exhibition here. It inspired Ibsen to write his last play, When We Dead Awaken. And I see you, Karl Ove, as a continuation, as an extension of both of these, Ibsen and Munch. Your autobiography, My Struggle, as an updated Peer Gynt, the crazy adventures of a naughty boy from Kristiansand who flings himself headlong into life and finds himself in the bizarrest of situations, from the Hall of the Mountain King to a lunatic asylum in Cairo, discovering himself along the way. And I see strong parallels with Munch. Munch painted self-portraits all through his long life, a huge number of them, peeling the layers of the onion as he attempts to show both the inner and the outer truth. And you do exactly the same in your extraordinarily brave volumes of autobiography. I'd like to read some words that were written by Munch, but I think might just as easily have been written by you. My art is self-confession. Through it, I seek to clarify my relationship to the world. This could be called egotism. However, I have always thought and felt that my art might help others to clarify their own search for truth. And now I'm going to start by asking you an obvious first question. Why Munch, and how did it all begin?
That is in fact a difficult question, because if you are from Norway, it's only 5 million people, and Munch is the artist, as Ibsen is the writer, and they're everywhere. I guess it's like asking someone from Britain, where did it all begin with Shakespeare? I mean, Shakespeare is everywhere, you know. It's hard to define. But there is a moment anyway, because I was never in museums when I grew up. I grew up, you know, in a provincial town, and it wasn't just not part of my life. And then we went, when I was 17, to a school trip to Oslo, into the National Gallery. And I was very much into reading, and I was very curious, and I loved, you know, everything I saw. I loved the National Romantic, the paintings, the green, the fjords, there are some Monets there are a lot of stuff. And then it's like you turn a corner and you come into a room which completely blew my mind. It was something completely different. It was Munch, the Munch room, and the Munch room is still there, and it is an amazing room. I don't know how many Munch paintings it is, but it's like 10 maybe. It's his best work. And it had the same kind of appeal to me then as Dostoevsky had in reading. It was like, this is about life and death, this is about me, this is about my existence, you know. And then I have, you know, maybe left that behind, and I thought that was a kind of an adolescence experience, and they are a bit naive, and they're a bit primitive, and too simple, and you see them, you know, printed, and wow, jealousy, that's very obvious, you understand what it is, and so on. But then you see them again, and they have an aura. They have that still, that power, to me at least. There are something going on in those paintings still when you see them. Yeah, I'm a writer, and when the Munch Museum approached me, they just asked me, do you want to do an exhibition on Munch? You have the museum to your disposal. You have all the paintings to your disposal. You can do whatever you want. And I said, yes, I would love to. And I had no idea. I mean, I have no experience. I have no idea what will work, would not work. But I knew one thing, and that is that Munch, at least in Norway, is a very iconic painter. So when you see a Munch painting, you see Munch. And I think that may be the case here too. If you see Scream, you see the scream. You don't see the anxiety, you don't see the experiment, you don't see the risks he took. You see something canonic, iconic, it's done, you know it's quality, it's good. But that's what you see. And I was taken down to the basement in the Munch Museum, where they have, I think they have 1,000 paintings, and they have also 20,000 paperworks there. And that's everything that he had in possession when he died. That's there. And it's all kind of stuff. It's like a work in progress that's frozen in time. So it's extremely high quality things, extremely bad quality. It's sketches, it's finished, unfinished, incredibly interesting. And you could see, so what I tried to do was make an exhibition with Munch where it was as you saw Munch for the first time. So there's many, many, many paintings that never have been exhibited before. That's on that show. So for instance, the first room is just full of light, is full of blue skies, it's very harmonic, it's like idyllic, it's like the opposite of the image of Munch, but he did that too, you know. And then I thought maybe I'll try to make a kind of a narrative, because I am a writer. So it starts with the idyllic garden, people, bathing, and then you go into a forest that's more and more empty, and in the end it's just snow. So it's like it's more and more empty, and then it's in a black room, which is the inner self, I thought. Completely chaotic, incredibly intense. It's like the Scream, but without the Scream. And then you go out and you see portraits, see all the people in you. That's the other. That was the kind of concept behind the exhibition.
It worked amazingly.
And there was no signs, no dates, no written anything, because I wanted them to see the paintings as they were. And I find it so interesting also because I don't know what quality is in art or in literature. I have really no idea what it is. It's so difficult to define, you know. And then you see something and, you know, you relate to it, and it's attached and it's quality, but you can't really say what it is.
No, that's right. It's you. Would you like to read your introduction to the book when you write about this? Karl Ove, there's a wonderful picture of a cabbage field that he put into the exhibition, which I think must have surprised a lot of people, but it means a lot.
Yeah, it is actually a cabbage field just behind his house, where he lived for those 40 years. Sometimes it is impossible to say why and how a work of art achieves its effect. I can stand in front of a painting and become filled with emotions and thoughts, evidently transmitted by the painting. And yet it is impossible to trace those emotions and thoughts back to it and say, for example, that the sorrow came from the colors, or that the longing came from the brush strokes, or that the sudden insight that life will end lay in the motive. One picture I feel this way about was painted by Edvard Munch in 1915. It depicts a cabbage field. The cabbages is in the foreground are roughly executed, almost sketch-like, dissolving into green and blue brush strokes deeper into the background. Next to the cabbage field, there is an area of yellow, over that an area of dark green, and over that again a narrow band of darkening sky. That is all. That is the whole painting. But the picture is magical. It is so charged with meaning. Looking at it, I feel as if something is bursting within me, and yet it is just a field of cabbages. So what is going on with this painting? When I look at its colors and shapes, which are so radically simplified that they suggest a landscape more than they represent it, I see death, as if the painting intended a reconciliation with death, but a trace of something terrible remains. And what is terrible is the unknown, that we don't know what awaits us. But Munch's painting doesn't really say anything, doesn't give form to anything other than cabbages, grain, trees and sky, and yet death, and yet reconciliation, and yet peace, and yet a trace of something terrible. Is it simply that the line of the fields leads inwards towards darkness, and that dusk is descending in the sky above? Perhaps, but many have painted fields, many have painted dusk, without attaining what this painting so calmly radiates. Munch was around 50 years old when he painted Cabbage Field. He was known as a painter of the inner life, of dream, death and sexuality. He had gone through a life crisis. After that he withdrew from social life and he no longer sought out pain where he painted. He turned outwards, he painted the sun. And that isn't hard to understand. Everything begins anew when the sun rises. Darkness yields, the day opens up, the world once again becomes visible. Over the next 30 years, he painted what he saw there in the visible world. But the visible world is not objective reality. It appears to each individual as seen by them, and Munch's great gift lay in his ability to paint not only what his gaze took in, but also what the gaze was charged with. There is a longing in this painting of the Cabbage Field, a longing to disappear and become one with the world. And that longing to disappear and become one with the world fulfilled the painting for him, fulfilled for him the act of painting. That is why this painting is so good. What disappears re-emerges in what comes into being. And if the disappearance ceased for the painter as soon as he finished the painting, it is still represented in the picture, which fills us again and again with its emptiness. Cabbages, grain and forest, yellow and green, blue and orange.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about repetition of motifs, because I know that people feel cheated, insulted almost, that Munch made different versions of the Scream, 4 colored versions, and the lithograph that you can see here in the exhibition. And people somehow feel that this devalues its authenticity. And Munch was asked this, and I'd like to read his answer, which I think is wonderful. I've never made copies of any work. In instances where I have made use of the same subject, I wish to make myself more deeply involved. People complain loudly that I have painted it on several occasions. But a picture that I have struggled with for a whole year cannot be dismissed in a single picture. Why should I not be allowed to paint such an important subject 5 times, when other people produce an endless succession of palm trees, apples, church spires, and haystacks? And we know who he's talking about. And like Munch, you go back to the same motifs in your work. You revisit specific important events in your books, such as the death of your father, just as Munch revisited the death of his sister Sophie and his Scream experience, both in painting and in writing. And you say in your book, I quote, "The world is not something in itself ready to be observed. The world materializes in our gaze. It is not, it becomes. But that engendering is impossible to live in, impossible to grasp, and so we invent common formulae and baptize them truths. All the knowing we have about the world, we hold up in order not to be overpowered by the shifting incomprehensibility of it." My beloved Nietzsche says it in a different way. Nietzsche says, there are no truths, only perspectives. And our recollection of a memory today will be different from our recollection of the same memory tomorrow or next week. And I wondered, how have you understood your experiences differently over time by revisiting them in your work?
By revisiting?
By revisiting them. How have you understood, say, you know, when you come at, say, the death of your father, and you visit it and revisit it, how do you understand your need for repetition, your need for revisiting?
It's on 2 levels here. It's one personal level,
yes,
between me and my father, and
yes,
the other one is the writing, which has to do with writing about memories and write about a life, where the essential thing in a life is that all the relations changes through the life. I mean, my father was one thing for me when I was 10, and one thing when I was 20, one thing when I was 30. And that's what I try to kind of to capture in the book.
The multiple perspectives.
Yes, exactly, of the same events that change. And that's the scary thing, is to discover that the past, you think the past that's over. It's fixated. It's done.
Yes, exactly.
It isn't. If you
It
go
isn't.
back, it's changed because you have changed, and also our collective look of history changed. You know, so it's moving, it's changing, and my book is very much about that.
Yes, it is.
It's about I try not to fixate things. I try not to, you know.
Yeah.
I try to do the opposite. Try to make them move and make them change and make them be in perspective to each other, you know, because there is no such thing as one point, and from that's truth, you know. Well, you move, and that's another truth,
Yes.
but this is the same point you're looking at.
Yeah.
That's so complicated, you know. We can't
Yes.
have that in our lives normally, so we
No.
have to have. That's for art, you know. That's for literature
Yes.
to deal with, but you can't really do it in your own lives. We feel we are the same now
Yes.
that we were 20.
Yes.
We look the same, but we don't. We just don't remember how the world looked when we were 20.
Yes.
You know? I think.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
I think that's
Yeah.
very much
Yeah.
the writing's relation to memories.
Why do you think Munch is striking such a big chord today?
I don't know. I mean, that's very hard to answer.
I thought, okay,
You have like 2 minutes
I'll
left.
I'll give you some time, because I thought I'll ask this mean question to Karl Ove, and then I thought, well, God, what if he asks it back to me? And so I thought, well, actually, I think we live in a time of great anxiety, don't we, at the moment? And I think it starts with Nietzsche. Of course, Munch was reading Nietzsche in 1892, the winter before he came back to Oslo and painted The Scream. And he was reading Zarathustra. God is dead, you know, that absolute hammer blow to the generation. And, you know, what is the meaning of life? And particularly, you know, if we've murdered our God, what do we do for moral codes? What is right and wrong forever and ever, amen. Oh, you know, that was just one thread that went into the painting of The Scream, obviously. But I think that, you know, this is horribly relevant for our time, really. You know, we say God is dead. We haven't put anything good up in his stead. We don't know how to behave. We're looking for meaning. And I think that is one of the reasons why Munch is so very relevant to today. And people find him so relevant.
Yes, very interesting that you read them, the two of them so close, and you have also Dostoevsky in the mix here. So, and all the three of them you could read now and relate to now. And yeah. But it's like all of them are laying something bare. That's what they're doing. That's the project, and we haven't fixated it again. I think I don't know. I have no idea.
No. Me neither. Good. I think we've come to the end of our time.